Hi, welcome to Train Signal. We're continuing our lessons on advanced services and focusing specifically on Active Directory Federation services. When we go to deploy ADFS, we're trying to create a partnership between two different organizations. They don't share a common Active Directory organization because they're two different companies, they're two different organizations. But they've got a business relationship that is calling for sharing of information between these two organizations. So how do we make that work? Well, ADFS enables that. Other lessons have focused on how to install it and how to set up basic configuration. The meat of ADFS manipulation is building a business communication between the two parties where one partner, the so-called account partner, is supplying information about the user accounts in its organization that is being received by the resource partner, which catches that information and uses that to determine access to various applications that are part of that network. So in our example, GlobalMantics has been invested in by a partner organization, the Cash Cow Capital Group, and that organization reasonably wants to be able to keep an eye on our financials. They are the claims provider. They are providing information about themselves to GlobalMantics, which has a resource that the account partner wants to connect into. GlobalMantics is the relying party. They are relying upon the information coming from Cash Cow Capital Group. So on this slide, we're describing what's being configured in the partner organization, in Cash Cow Capital Group's network. They're going to set up an ADFS server. They are the claims provider, and they are going to set up something called a relying party trust. Now that may be a tad surprising, because we described GlobalMantics as the relying party. Would not the relying party configure the relying party trust? By the same token, GlobalMantics is the relying party, and they're going to configure something called a claims provider trust, which, just by its name, you would tend to think would be the thing created by the claims provider. The naming works opposite of what you would expect, and the reason why is that each side is trying to identify and describe the behavior of the other party, or how it's going to interact with the other party, what rules it's going to obey when it talks to the other side of the conversation. The relying party, in this slide, defines a claims provider trust to describe what it expects, what it will accept from the claims provider. The claims provider configures a relying party trust to describe which party it's talking to and in what way it's going to send information to the relying party. So if you think of it that way, you can argue that this kind of makes some sense. But certainly the choice of naming structure is not necessarily conducive to immediate understanding of that interesting fact. So what happens at the claims provider? What does Cash Cow Capital Group do as the supplier of user information to describe their users to GlobalMantics? Well, they're going to build a set of rules. Those rules will identify issuance transform rules. What's an issuance transform rule? I can take information about a user. I'll pull it in from some attribute store like Active Directory or from an ADLDS instance. And I can apply a series of rules to customize the information that I prepare to send to the relying party based upon the information that's in Active Directory. That manipulation is transformation, and issuance transform rules describe how I'm going to do that. Issuance authorization rules identify exactly who we're going to allow to pass their credentials to the other side of the network. I might limit that to just people who are members of a particular group or who have a particular department configured in their AD user account, or have a particular email address if I want to nail it down to a specific somebody. Delegation authorization rules identify which users are allowed to impersonate others for the purposes of this work. So the account partner, the claims provider, gathers that data and ships it across the network to the relying party. The relying party in our example is GlobalMantics. We've got a web application. Cash Cow Capital Group wants to get into it. We need to define which sorts of criteria coming from that other ADFS server will adequately identify somebody who we intend to allow to gain access to our application. So on the relying party side of the connection, we're going to build a claims provider trust. And that's going to have rules configured in it. Fewer rules available in a claims provider trust than in a relying party trust. We can only define what are called acceptance transform rules. I can receive a set of claims from the claims provider and analyze them in a variety of different ways to determine whether I accept that. Will I accept and pass through those credentials to an application that says, hey, who is this guy? So let's take a look at getting this set up. So here I am on Cash Cow's ADFS server. They've asked me to help configure their side of the connection too, which is fine. And I can configure their end of the process by defining the kinds of claim information that they're going to be sending to us at GlobalMantics. We are the relying party. Cash Cow needs to create a relying party trust that describes that connection. So I can do that by clicking the link that says add a trusted relying party, or alternatively, I can come over here to the trust relationships area, click the relying party trusts portion of the GUI, and a right click brings up an option to add a relying party trust, and that's of course over here in the actions area as well. So configuring a relying party trust is basically exchanging information about the two organizations. After reading my little welcome screen, I'm going to go ahead and click next. We need to get information about this relying party. We need to know what kind of certificate it's using. We need to know what sort of strategy it's using to be able to digitally sign and encrypt the communications back and forth between the two parties. The easiest way to access that information is through something called federation metadata. Now that may ring a bell. A different lesson covered that idea. Let me cancel out of my wizard for a moment and point out that over here in the area labeled endpoints, way down here, is a section that describes federation metadata. This is part of a URL. HTTPS, because again we're using certificate-based SSL communication between both of these parties, HTTPS ://ADFS server name / this, federation metadata / 2007-06 / federation metadata.xml. If I can get one of these servers to be able to hit that URL on the other server and securely transfer that information across the wire with HTTPS, that nails up the first major piece of our relying party trust. And I can do the reverse of this on GlobalMantics' side. I can configure my claims provider trust by gathering the federation metadata from the claims provider, in this case, Cash Cow Capital Group. So as I go to create my relying party trust, my first goal is to get at that file. The GUI is actually kind enough to let us either supply the actual URL or just the name of the server. That needs to be DNS resolvable. It needs to be resolvable across two networks if they're knit together. In my example here, we set up a VPN connection between our routers. So, in this case, the server in question at GlobalMantics is GLB, globalmantics-adfs1.globalmantics.local. The name resolution should work because I've configured DNS in such a way that each domain's DNS servers are configured as a conditional forwarder of the other. In other words, when a request to resolve a name for one of those domains hits a local DNS server, that DNS server says, ah, yes, I see, that belongs to our partner organization. Their DNS server is over there, why don't you go talk to them? And the request gets forwarded that way. Alternatively, I could have asked GlobalMantics to save that metadata into a file. I could copy that file over to this computer, bring it on a USB stick, whatever, and pull it in from a file. That works. Or I could type it all in myself, but boy, is that a pain. I'm going to go ahead and just go yank it off of the GlobalMantics ADFS server. Let me click Next, and we're going to get a surprising little error message. So far, it looks good, right? Reading Federation metadata, hey, looks good. This is going to work great, right? No. Verify that the specified URL or hostname is a valid Federation metadata endpoint. What does it not like? Look at the bottom line. The underlying connection was closed, could not establish trust relationship for the SSL TLS secure channel. What does it mean? We're trying to connect to that destination server using HTTPS. The way HTTPS works is I call that server and I say, hey, I want to connect to you securely. Do you have a public key that I can use to encrypt my communications to you? And that server says, well, yes, of course I've got a certificate. Here it is. Here's the public key. Use it to send as much encrypted data to me as you would like. The client takes that public key, uses it to encrypt the information that it wants to send to the server, sends it to the server. The server unencrypts that data with its private key. Public key encrypts, private key decrypts, and we're good. But there's an assumption there. The assumption is that the client trusts the certificate that it's getting from the server. It's kind of like if you get pulled over by the police, and instead of handing over your actual license, you left your wallet at home and hand over a fake ID. Or you draw a picture of yourself on a post-it note and hand that over. The officer's going to say, hey, I don't think this is a valid proof of your identity. Certificate services works the same way. When I hand you my certificate and say, hey, this is proof of my identity, your logical question is, says who? Who says that this is a proof of your identity? And the right answer should be, well, a CA that you trust says so. a certificate authority that you already believe is a valid source of this kind of information says that I'm trustworthy. So if we stop and think about this for a moment, the Global Mantex ADFS server is using a certificate that it got from where? From a Global Mantex certificate services server. The Global Mantex ADFS server is handing its public key from that certificate over to Cash Cow. Cash Cow looks at that digital certificate, the public key combined with the name of the server, and says, yes, I see the certificate claims to identify you, but it comes from a CA that I don't recognize. This certificate says that somebody called Global Mantex CA1 says that you are who you say you are, but I don't know who that is. So what we need to do is exchange CA root certificates. The computer here in Cash Cow needs to trust that the Global Mantex CA is trustworthy. Likewise, when we run this the other direction, the Global Mantex ADFS server is going to need to know that the Cash Cow ADFS server is using a certificate that comes from a trustworthy source, which is to say that the Global Mantex ADFS server needs a copy of the root certificate of the Cash Cow certificate authority. So I'm going to go get the root certificate for Cash Cow CA, put it on this server so that I can reach in and grab it from the Global Mantex side. I'll do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll set up our relying party trust and our claims provider trust. So I'm going to go to the Certificate Manager tool. I'm going to do that by way of the MMC. I'm going to open up the Microsoft Management Console and add the Certificates tool to it. If I don't, it's going to open up that tool under the context of my local user account. The end result of which is I don't get to manage the computer account that I really care about. If I look at the configuration of this computer, I can see that it has a certificate issued by the Cash Cow DC1 CA that provides server authentication support. This is the SSL cert that we configured when we first installed Active Directory Federation services. If I double-click it to open up its details, I can see that from Cash Cow's perspective, this is a great certificate. It comes from a CA. We trust that CA. Therefore, it's a good certificate. Now, if I take this certificate and feed it to Global Mantex, they're going to say, who's this Cash Cow Capital Group CA? Never heard of them before. So what I need to do is get my hands on that certificate and import it on the Global Mantex side, and then I'm going to do the reverse from their perspective coming this way. So how do I do that? Well, I can actually view the certificate for the root CA. I can go look at the details of that certificate, and I can copy the details of that certificate to a file. I can export that data to a file. I'm going to use the default of a DER encoded X.509 certificate. And it needs a name, and I'm going to call it Cash Cow CA certificate. And I'm going to go put it somewhere easy to get at, like the root of my C drive. Real world, I might well drop that file into, for example, a USB stick and walk it over to the other office, or FedEx it to them maybe. I don't know, perhaps. Good. We've created the certificate. I want to make sure that that's going to be accessible from the Global Mantex server. So as a safety check, I'm going to go ahead and drop the firewall on this server, because otherwise if I try to reach in, it won't let me in. I suppose I could go configure the actual formal exception on the firewall, but I'm going to be lazy here. Real world, go ahead and configure the firewall properly. In the interest of time, we'll do it this way. Net shell, ADV firewall, set all profiles, state off, firewall's down. Okay, great. If I spell exit right, we could do really well. There we go. Let's jump over to Global Mantex and do the same thing. So here's Global Mantex's ADFS server. Let's launch the MMC tool here, and we'll add in the certificate snap-in to manage the computer accounts for the local computer. Inside of which we've got a local certificate. It's a server authentication, which is to say an SSL certificate, which was granted by a CA called the GlobalMatics Hyper-V Host 1 CA. That's the host computer that the virtual machines are running on. That's my domain controller at the moment. I'm going to go view that certificate and export its details to a file. It's going to be x.509 cert. We're going to drop it into the C drive of this server. And we'll call it something useful like GlobalMatics CA certificate. Okay, that worked. Let me close up those windows. Let me go drop the firewall on this side to allow cash cow to connect in this way. And there we go. So we've done that on that side. So now both servers have exported their root CA certificate. Both of those files are sitting at the root of the C drive of the respective ADFS servers. The firewalls are down so I can reach in from one server to the other to go grab that file. Now, otherwise, we might exchange these by handing over a manila envelope in a park or something, or find some other secure way to exchange that. Dropping firewalls is not the most secure way to make that work, truth be told. So here from GlobalMatics' ADFS server, I'm going to open up Windows Explorer. I'm going to go connect to /cc-adfs1, cash cow's ADFS server, /C$. I'm going to just sneak in through the old $C$ C drive administrative share trick. I've got the same user ID, same password, so I can slide right in. Real world, I would need to authenticate. There is the cash cow CA certificate. I'm going to throw a double click at it, and that starts the import process here on the GlobalMatics side of the house. It says, hey, do you want to install this certificate? Sure. I want to install it for the local machine. Wants to know what store do I want to put it in. And I'm going to put it in the Trusted Root Certification Authorities store. I want to say that this CA is one of the CAs that I trust to produce legitimate certificates. We need that fact to be able to validate the public key coming from cash cow to GlobalMatics. I'm going to click Next and Finish. Import succeeded. I'm going to click OK and close up that C drive window. And if I now go look at the Trusted Root CA's area, there's GlobalMatics' CA, there's cash cow CA. We now trust that cash cow CA produces decent certificates. Cash cow's ADFS server is going to supply a cash cow certificate. GlobalMatics can say, yes, I see your certificate is valid because it comes from a CA that I trust. Let's do the same thing on cash cow's side. I'm going to close things up here on the GlobalMatics side of the house and jump over to our partner's ADFS server. So here on cash cow's ADFS server, I'm going to do the same trick in the opposite direction. Windows Explorer, /GlobalMatics ADFS server 1, /C$. In I go. There's GlobalMatics' certificate. I'm going to throw a double click at it, say yes, I do want to open that file, and we start the import process. Let's go install that certificate. It's going in the local machine store. Specifically, it's going to go in the container for Trusted Root CAs. Looks good. Click Finish. And the import succeeded. We'll click OK. And OK again. I'm going to close up my C drive window. I'm going to close up my certificate services window after I do a quick check to see that the certificate I imported from GlobalMatics is here in the list of Trusted Root CAs on the cash cow ADFS server. That being done, I can now come on back to my ADFS dialog box, which tried to connect to GlobalMatics' ADFS server, but failed to do so with SSL because I didn't trust the certificate that I was getting from it. But now I do. I'm going to click Next in this dialog box again, say go back to GlobalMatics' ADFS server, go get that Federation metadata file and check it out, build your SSL connection to do so, and the cash cow ADFS server will reach out across the network, go talk to the GlobalMantics ADFS server, yank down that federation metadata, and we're into the next step of the wizard, which is to give the connection a friendly name, GlobalMantics, for example, and any helpful notes that describe this relationship. There we go. ADFS connection to enable auditing finances of recent investment target, a company called GlobalMantics. Looks good. That way we don't forget what this particular relying party trust is for. I click Next, and we start the process of building issuance authorization rules. Under what circumstances do I allow someone to use this connection to get from Cash Cow to GlobalMantics? I can throw the doors open wide, permit anybody on the Cash Cow side from using this connection, or I can go the other way. I can say deny everybody. I would then need to build specific rules to allow those who I want to allow. That to me seems like the more appropriate security approach. I could go the other way and allow everybody except for a certain somebody if there was lots of people, or indeed most people, in the one organization that need access to the other. In this case, we talked to the Cash Cow people. They said that only their auditors group really needs access to this. So I'm going to click Next. And what we're looking at here is all the data being brought in automatically from the GlobalMantics ADFS server. Information about the certificates that control encryption, digital signature logic, what kind of claims the relying party is expecting to receive. At the moment, none. We haven't configured that side of the house yet. And other relevant data about the relationship. Nothing to change there. This is just a viewer of those configuration details. We'll click Next. And we're ready to close up this window. We have an option to view the Claim Rules dialog box. For the time being, I'll leave that where it is. I'll leave that unchecked and click Close. And there we go. We now have a GlobalMantics relying party trust that describes a connection to the GlobalMantics ADFS server. Let me repeat that process on the other side, and we'll have a nailed-up Federation trust connecting these two environments. So here's the GlobalMantics ADFS server. I'm going to go to Claims Provider Trusts. I want to create the information that describes the incoming connection from Cash Cow. I'll right-click and build a new Claims Provider Trust. And as before, I'll go supply the Federation metadata that describes the connection. We're going to go reach out to cashcow-adfs1.cashcow capital group. .com to be able to go get that data. Click Next, and we're ready to build the remaining details. What's the name? So this is an ADFS connection to allow financial auditing by our new investor. Once again, there's all the data that I did not need to supply manually, hooray, because it came in on my Federation metadata file. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to leave the Claim Rules box unchecked for the moment and click Close. And there we go. We now have a Claims Provider Trust for Cash Cow Capital. Now, interestingly, there's an option in there for an Active Directory Claims Provider Trust. Now that was there by default. What's that? That actually allows for an internal use of ADFS within an organization. This is used perhaps in a case where a company wants to take a corporate web application, put it in the DMZ, make it visible from the internet, and let corporate employees connect to it without having to directly authenticate against Active Directory. They can supply claims information to an ADFS server in the DMZ, or maybe an ADFS proxy server, and ADFS can validate those credentials by using the Active Directory claims provider. This is an internal use of ADFS. The situation you'll see perhaps more commonly is the business-to-business federation that we're building here. So we've demonstrated that GlobalMantics and Cash Cow can see each other from an Active Directory Federation Services perspective. We have a communication bridge over which to pass information. And in a subsequent lesson, we'll set up the toll bridge that identifies exactly who's able to cross the bridge between these two organizations. But we'll describe that in a different lesson, so for the time being, we'll bring this one to a close. And I look forward to sharing more ADFS with you soon.